everybody. Welcome back to our next webinar. In our series on surrender prevention, we are going to be talking about house training struggles tonight. I think many of us think of house training struggles as something we see with our puppies, but really we can see it for a variety of reasons with all ages of dogs. And tonight we intend to discuss a lot of tactics that can help with dogs of all ages, ultimately hoping preventing the need for surrender. So on our agenda today, we are going to be talking about preventing problems from even starting with our dogs. And then when we do kind of miss that opportunity, or maybe we have a dog going home or bringing into the home that we already know has a problem, we're going to talk about some common challenges that we see here at Good Pup and some ways we can start to hopefully solve that problem and remedy that house training. Now, before we dive into solving those problems, we are going to talk about the prevention, because what better way to not have a problem if we can stop it from the get-go? Well, we want to look at identification when we're preventing problems. So these can be various things we look at that hopefully we can make a plan for if we potentially see a problem that might happen because of things we've identified, we can make a plan to not have it be one. We also want to talk a bit about our expectations as well. I think many of us might have higher expectations than what we should. And then we're going to talk about how we're going to use management to help us solve or prevent, rather, those problems from starting. Okay. So when we talk about identification of problems to begin with, this is, again, as I said, looking at things that have a risk of creating a house training problem. So if we can identify it from the get-go and then use tactics to not have that be a concern, we're going to be much better off. So first we want to consider a change in environment, right? So whether it's our own lives or our dog's lives, right? We all know that change brings stress, and that can be hard, right? And that can also make the process of house training hard if we are stressed. So identifying really the environment that dogs are going into and strategizing a bit before that ever happens can be a big part, right? So looking at that lifestyle and environment, where they came from. Are they coming from a kennel environment? Are they coming from a breeding environment? Is it coming from a home to a home? What about the actual lifestyle they're going into? As I started to mention, are we moving into an apartment? Are we moving into a house, right? All of these are going to have different areas, different ideas as far as around our elimination process. And so knowing that going in, again, we can start to think about things and build a plan. Speaking of elimination, where are they going to have that elimination access? If we live in an apartment, is our access outside include having to go down an elevator ride, across a lobby, to have to go down steps? Or can we just bop out the back door? Or maybe we don't have a fenced yard and we've got to walk down the street to an area. These, again, things to consider with maybe how we set up our schedule and what we're going to do surrounding that. What about the age of the dog? Certainly my young dogs are going to be different than my older dogs, right? We're going to have different developmental stages. My younger dogs, my bladders are not fully developed. So they haven't learned how to expand, which helps with my holding, right? Extending that time frame. They are also going to have different sizes of bladder, and the strength isn't fully developed versus an older dog. But then geriatric dogs, we may run into weaker bladders as well. What about the history when we talk about our dogs? Where are they at with learning, right? My young puppies may have no history. They may have a clean slate. Whereas my older dogs may have a history of going outside. And then suddenly I'm asking them, potentially based on their new lifestyle or change in environment, to go inside. And that can certainly influence how we're going to go about setting up our house training plan. And then we also want to consider our dog's personality. We may have dogs coming into homes that are a little bit shyer, a little bit more nervous about the outside world. Maybe they've never been exposed outside, or maybe we have an outside dog coming in. Maybe this makes them nervous. Maybe I have a really exuberant dog about getting to go outside. All of these could influence the timing of when we're going to be taking our dogs outside, or how well they might have that bladder control. So things we want to identify and look at when we're starting to create and build that plan to hopefully prevent any house training concerns from developing or incomplete house training. Now, the other thing when we're talking about preventing problems from coming up is we want to talk a little bit about expectations. I love this picture. No, it doesn't have anything to do with house training, but this is a client at Good Pup. She came to us specifically with her new puppy. Her one goal was that she wanted her dog to be able to paddleboard with her. And you can see here that we successfully helped her and helped him learn how to paddleboard with her. And he's happy. He has great positive body language. He loves it, right? But the reason I bring this picture up is because sometimes our expectation, depending on the scenario, the dog themselves, their history, is more than what it should be. It's higher than what it should be. And so sometimes we need to lower that expectation a little bit. But part of our expectations is also on us, okay? When we talk about dogs and house training is not a dog thing. House training is a human thing. We want our dogs to use the bathroom in a specific area, ideally for most of us or many of us outside of the home or a specific location within the home, okay? We need to commit to helping our dogs learn this because it's not normal for them. What is normal for them is that when their bladder feels full, physically, physiologically, their body is saying, I need to release this pressure. And so they use the bathroom. And we're going to capture that for our house training. But it's going to take some time on our part, a commitment to see this through. And that time that it does take for our dogs to learn this, it can be different for every dog, right? We may have an older dog who has always used the bathroom outside, who is suddenly being asked to use the bathroom inside on potty pads. That may take a long time. Maybe have a dog coming from a kennel environment to a home. Sorry, I'm not sure why my computer does that. And the adjustment of being in a home, right? And having been in a kennel for so long where they may have learned to use the bathroom in their kennel or go through a guillotine door outside, whatever the setup, right, may take more time as well. So we want to have an appropriate expectation in our mind of how we need to commit to this and the time it may take or may not take. We also want to have an appropriate expectation about accidents, right? Accidents happen. Ask my 10-year-old who dumped the milk over last night at the dining room table after I mopped the floor. It never fails. But accidents happen, guys. It's not abnormal, whether it's an 8-week-old, 8-month-old, or 8-year-old dog, okay? And so I think if we just prepare ourselves for when they happen rather than hoping they never happen, we are in a much better frame of mind. And preparations might include having the appropriate things to clean up the accident, carpet cleaners, solutions, enzymatic solutions to get rid of that smell. And then it's not so detrimental when it does happen. We also need to have an expectation about what we don't want to be doing when we build this plan. Specifically here, I'm referencing punishment, okay? Punishment can be an effective tool in the right situations. It is not a tool we use at Good Pup because punishment breaks down that bond with the owner and their dog. And there's so many more effective tools out there available now for dogs, for training, with positive reinforcement, with treats, that we really just don't need to go down this alley. And certainly not with a puppy who physiologically doesn't know and can't hold their bladder, right? So we don't want to damage that relationship with them because often what happens is when we do punish our dogs for those accidents, it becomes connected to us rather than the accident. There's reasons behind this. One is timing, but again, it's what we don't want to be doing. So think through the appropriate expectations when you're building your plan and considering your house training. Consider the commitment, the time it's going to take, that accidents are going to happen. Just go ahead and be prepared. And what we don't want to do when it comes to training to make it potentially more problematic. Now, let's also look at management, right? So if we've identified all these various potential problems or situations, things that might create problems for our house training, how are we going to not have them be a problem, right? And how are we going to use things to help us with this time frame of getting through this house training when it comes to that expectation? Well, we're going to use management. We're going to talk about elimination areas, right? Where they are going to be, how we're going to set them up. We're going to set up schedules. We're going to look at rewards, and we're going to look at supervision. Let's break those down a bit more. So when we look at an elimination area for our dogs, again, bouncing forward too fast. Hopefully we have identified potential problems, and that's going to may influence where we select our elimination area, because we do want to identify one that everybody can be on the same page about in the home for that consistency, right? Whether it's inside on pads, it's inside on a turf, it's outside on the balcony, it's in the dog park across the street, or it's outside in the backyard. Identifying it allows us to then set our schedule accordingly to work with it. We also initially, for elimination areas, because we can change them, we can modify them, but initially, depending on the dog, we want them as close as possible to access for our dog. Okay, so if it's inside the home, it's ideal that it's not down 2 flights of stairs, but on the floor that the dog is going to be initially getting adjusted to the home. Or if it's outside the home, it's as close as possible to the exit door. Okay, this is going to influence mostly when we're thinking about our bladders and size when they're full, right? Helping us get there when we want to be there. Because for that area, we want our dogs to end up there when they have full bladders and full colons. So if they're easier to access, it's going to make it easier for us to get there when those bladders and colons are full. That leads me into my schedules, right? If I want to end up in my identified elimination area with a full bladder or a full colon, then I need to have my dog on a schedule. Feedings. When I eat, it's going to activate my gastrointestinal tract, right? So that means defecation is going to happen. I want to think about when I'm going to feed so that I have time afterwards to take my dog to their elimination area. This plays into that availability in the elimination area, right? When can they access it? How quickly can we get there? How long does it take me to get there? Do I need to feed them so that I have 30 minutes to walk them to where they have to go? Okay. And then playtime. Playtime starts pumping hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, all of which can influence the need to use the bathroom. So we need to schedule that. And what about naps, where my bladders can fill as well as my colons, right? These also influence when I need to go out. So where our elimination area is, when we feed, when we play, when we nap, walks, all of that's going to influence the schedule. And having a schedule is going to allow us to end up at our elimination area with our dog when they have a full bladder and a full colon, so that we can help them make that connection. This is where you need to be when you feel this pressure. And then additionally, we help them make that connection by adding rewards afterwards. Okay, so this means they have finished successfully eliminating, and we actually give them a reward for that action. Okay, there's a catch here though with our rewards as well. While yes, we're going to help make it very clear you're getting this treat for that, in order to make it clear, we need to make sure that reward happens a half a second to 1 second after they're done. So I can't be 10 feet away from my dog and then calling them over to me to reward them. Nope, because they just got rewarded for coming to me, not for eliminating. So this is key. This is one of the reasons I always recommend my dog is on a 6-foot leash when I'm house training, so they're near to me, so that I can deliver that reward right when they need to. I also want to make that reward pretty high value when I'm house training. I really want to help them make that connection. This is where you need to be when you feel this sensation, okay? And one of the other things we want to make sure, even though we're making sure that reward comes at a half a second to a second after the dog has finished eliminating, I do want to make sure that they have finished. So we don't want to be ruffling in our pocket where the dog learns the treats are, and that interrupts them from finishing. We want to make sure they've completed, that we're standing off to the side, watching out of the corner of our eye. They're 100% finished, have gotten up, looked at us, and then we reward, okay? Because if we interrupt them, many of our dogs will learn, oh, I just go out and I do this as soon as I'm done, which I'm not really done, but I'm just going to do a little bit of this to get that treat. And that's what we don't want to have happen. So we can also, just reading through my notes here, making sure I'm saying everything I want, right? We can also use the rewards to help us with our management and making that connection. But there's some things we need to consider when we're doing that, okay? All right. Lastly, it is very important that after we have identified our elimination area and we've got our dogs on our schedule, a schedule for getting there, we know when they're going to get there, we've got our rewards, we're ready for that, is that we have to make a plan for what's going to happen when they're not there, right? Because accidents happen. We already discussed that. That's an expectation. But the challenge is that eliminations are self-reinforcing. What does that mean? That means that when my dog has a full bladder, there's pressure and it's uncomfortable, just like us when we need to use the bathroom. And when the dog goes to the bathroom, that pressure is released and they feel better. That is a reward. They are self-reinforced for using the bathroom, okay? So if I don't want them to be self-reinforced or rewarded, essentially, for going in an area where I don't want them to go, then I need to do my best to prevent accidents from happening, which means in between all these opportunities of going outside to the elimination area, my dog is under direct supervision. And when they're not, they're behind a gate in a small room, and I know that they've recently used the bathroom. They're in their crate or an X pen. They're on a leash attached to me, maybe. We like to call that the umbilical cord. And I've closed doors and limited their access to other areas, okay? Because I don't want those accidents to happen. I want instead to try to use my schedule to always be where I need to be and then limit their freedom so that they are unlikely to have an accident, or I'm watching them and I see them start to do things like smell or circle or pace, which might indicate they need to use the bathroom, and I'm scooping them up and quickly getting them to their elimination area, okay? And I don't always scoop them up, just as a side note, because sometimes that can be scary for my dogs. So the goal would be to hopefully catch them sniffing, pacing before they're in the act, and encouraging them with a treat or a leash. Let's get out the door. Let's go to where we need to be, okay? All right, so we have all these various ways we can ideally prevent a house training problem from developing, which is the route we want to go. That being said, the reality is many of us have probably run into some of these problems, or we know people have run into these problems. It happens, right? That's an expectation to set. So we're going to look at inside accidents. We're going to talk about some common crate mishaps and some outside issues we run into. And then ultimately at the end, we're going to look at an unrealistic expectation when it comes to house training. So first, let's look at our inside accidents, right? These are the worst. They're not fun cleaning up, okay? We already talked about setting an expectation that accidents are going to happen. We can certainly limit, hopefully, if not even fully prevent them from happening with appropriate management and our direct supervision and our schedule. But what happens if they are happening repeatedly because we missed it and we had an accident and then we had a second? So now we've had 2 episodes where the dog's been reinforced. Well, first thing we're going to start with, we're going to reevaluate our management. Are we not taking them out frequently enough? Did we miss when they'd taken a nap and they got up? Should we feed them a little earlier or a little later? We need to break that down and see where we might have possibly messed things up on our end, because that's most likely what happened. And then we need to modify that, okay? We also want to look at the elimination area for our dogs. So if they are having frequent accidents, are they finding it more challenging to get to that elimination area? Is it too far away and do they not have complete access to it? We're going to talk about it at the end, but many dogs don't know how to tell us they need to go out the door and down the street, right? So we might need to consider making something closer if we're having accidents happen repeatedly, okay? We might need to increase how frequently we're taking our dogs to the elimination area. Maybe we just thought that they could do 3 hours and they can't. We need to go back to 2 hours between eliminations, okay? When we're in that elimination area, are we allowing enough time for them to eliminate, for them to completely void that bladder and their colon? This is very important because I think many of us are in a rush, right? We run our dogs to their elimination area. We've got to rush back home to get to work or out the door or wherever we're going. Some dogs may need to eliminate multiple times to fully void their bladder. That's not abnormal. Some dogs have issues with where they eliminate, right? Where they defecate. And so we might need to walk them. We might need to give them more space. We'll talk about that a bit more. But we want to make sure they have enough time to do it. And then we also need to break down, when are we given that delivery or that reward? Is it when it needs to happen? Is it a half a second to a second afterwards? Am I missing treats? Am I not taking treats with me? Maybe there's always a way to give a reward with praise and have a little praise party, but maybe that's not enough for my dog to help them make that connection. And lastly, is everybody in the home being consistent? Consistency is key. I need everybody on the same page if we are going to successfully stop or modify a house training problem and get our dogs back on track. So lots of different things we're going to look at for our inside accidents. That specifically is in regards to our dogs that are not making the connection to going outside. What about our dogs that are having accidents and aren't going on their pads, right? As I said, house training is for us, not our dogs. So for many dogs, it's very hard to differentiate between a carpet and a pad. Outside, at least, gives us a little bit more differences with texture and smells and sights, right? Which can also complicate things. But specifically with our pads, if I'm running into problems. So I've got a dog in a home and they just are refusing to use the pad. Well, let's look at a couple of things. What can we do to really help them make an association that this is what needs to happen here, okay? At this pad, well, we can actually take some of the urine that has been somewhere else and feces, and we can put it on the pad. Smells and adding their smells is a natural way to entice them to explore that area and use that area more. It actually creates, it is influenced internally chemically, right, where the dog needs to use the bathroom. Additionally, we want to increase our frequency of visits to the pads, right? So we're going to need to visit it more often, just like we would our elimination area. We definitely want to increase the value of the rewards here. Now, here is one where I actually change the value of the reward. So I'm doing something higher because we're primarily inside with many of my dogs who are pad trained, whether it's because of the apartment or maybe it's due to the weather outside, right? We do a lot of training inside too, and they have kibble abscess. So this would be important to where we want to modify the value so that it's different than the other things we do. I want to motivate my dog more. So real chicken, real cheese, that's what we want to be using, something very high value. These are also the dogs where direct supervision is 100% critical, okay? They cannot have freedom in the home until we start to make that connection. These are the dogs generally where I am recommending that when they are out and about, they are on a leash attached to the owner. We call this an umbilical tether, right? So this allows them to basically never be out of the owner's sight and hopefully has my owner's eyes on the dog more frequently so that we can see that body language that suggests they might need to use the bathroom and we're over to those pads. We also want to make sure that we always have access to the pads in these scenarios, okay? Remember that accidents are self-reinforcing, okay? So for my dogs that are having issues with the pads, I need to make sure they can get to them hands down. So whether they're in an X pen or in a different room, or this might be another one where I moved the location, right? I've got to have availability so they can seek them out constantly, okay? We never want to have them completely up. So those are all areas where we can work on helping make that pad connection a little easier. I will also tell you for some of my larger dogs and some of my outside dogs coming in with pads as well. Additionally, with those, I have set up a larger area with pads, okay, so that there's less area the dog is on that doesn't have pads, even under direct supervision. Sorry, computer again. This allows my dog, gives less risk of them missing the pad, so that can be helpful. And if I've got an outside dog coming in, sometimes I will add things to the pad like dirt or grass to, again, help with the smells and entice them to make that connection. This is where you need to go. Remember, all of this is part of training too, so we can certainly make our pads smaller as our dogs make that connection. This is about solving the problem so that we can move forward in our house trainings. All right, now let's look at some crate mishaps, right? Think what's common for people to see is that dogs that have accidents in the crate, how do we address that? Dogs that actually prefer to use the bathroom in the crate. I see this a lot with rescues, especially rescues coming from environments where they basically spent most of their time in a crate. And then we have those dogs that like to destroy things in their crate, such as their potty pads, and that makes that messy and rather hard to help them out. Okay, so for the dogs that have accidents in their crate, okay, there's two parts to this, right? It may just be that it's an accident. It may be that they're starting to connect the crate to potentially where they need to use a bathroom. So for my dogs that are just having accidents, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to reevaluate my management. Schedule's a big one here. Are they in the crate too long? Did they not have access to their elimination area, right? Did it not take them out in time? That's what we want to first look at. Secondly, very common with my puppies is, do I have a medical concern if I've got an accident happening? Especially when I see a lot of little, small urinations happening in a crate, and I have been taking my dog out multiple times. So always worth a vet visit to rule that out. When I did have my dog outside, did I make sure that they use the bathroom for an extended period of time? Do I have a dog that needs to use the bathroom multiple times before they go back in their crate? Something to consider, because then what if I come back inside and they go in their crate? Now, I bring this up because, again, I think for all of us, we're short on time, right? So we rush things. So we might want to consider being outside longer or in our elimination area longer with our dogs. And then secondly, for this part too, these are the dogs that if I do have a dog that maybe doesn't fully void that bladder right away and needs a little bit more, for those guys, I will actually not recommend they go back in their crate if I can't directly supervise them, because I'm just setting myself up for failure in the dog. If they didn't fully void that bladder, they're going to go in their crate. So instead, for those dogs, I tend to do the umbilical tether, right? So they're under direct supervision, and then we go back outside another 5 or 10 minutes as well. So keep that in mind for those dogs that kind of do that double potty or need to go multiple times when they're outside. These are also the dogs that say I can't get them out as frequently as they need to because I work and I'm not going to be there and I can't get a pet sitter in, right? In that case, I need an alternative area then. If I don't want my dog to learn to go in the crate, I need somewhere else I need to be. So if we look back at this picture here, this is a great solution one of my clients and I worked on, is we put an X pin outside of the crate. Everything in the crate the dog wanted, right? And then the X pin outside has my pads where the dog can use the bathroom. So they can exit the crate to use the bathroom because mom couldn't get him out over the course of the time frame while she was at work. So I need an alternative if I'm not going to be able to get my dog out at the scheduled time that they should and need to go out based on their size of their bladder and learning history. Okay. Because if not, they're going to have an accident. And then, of course, it's self-reinforcing. And now I'm teaching my dog's learning to just use the bathroom in the crate, which is not what we want. Consistency is key here. Okay. I've got to have a very rigid schedule. I've got to make sure my dog has enough time to go outside. I have to make sure if I can't do all of those, I've got an alternative area for them to be so that I don't continue to have those accidents in the crate. So keep that in mind when we do have accidents, that the goal here is to stop the accidents from continuing with our plans, with our solutions, so we don't end up with a dog where the crate becomes the preference for them to use the bathroom. Okay. So what do I do with a dog who thinks I'm supposed to just use the bathroom in here? Well, for many of these cases, these are not my puppies. Okay. The solution we're going to talk about works for both puppies and adults if this has happened. But often these are my dogs that have spent so much time in the crate or a kennel from wherever they're coming from, right? That's where they think they should use the bathroom. Well, first things first, when we're trying to solve this problem and get back on track with house training, is we want to rule out any potential medical concern. Okay, so we want to make sure we're not dealing with a bladder infection. We also, that they don't have any kind of parasites. Along that lines for medical, we need to make sure we don't have any nervousness or anxiety around being in the crate itself and or being in the crate by themselves. Okay, I'm referencing separation related behavior problems here, problem behaviors. I will tell you that that's a rabbit hole we're not going to go down today. If we do think that that may be why we're having eliminations in our crate, well, then guess what? That's a whole different discussion and an entirely different plan. And we'll need to work with a trainer on that. Good Pup is happy to help you with that. But when we do rule out parasites and potential urinary tract infections, then let's look at our other things. Feeding, okay? We really want to consider the feeding schedule with these guys because, again, it's about having that full colon and the full bladder, okay? So we may want to try to set up our feeding schedule around when we think they're defecating so that we have time to get them to another area. If I have a dog who is petrified of leaving their area, and we're going to break that down, then I might want to set it up where we feed, but we're not necessarily feeding in the kennel, maybe just outside the area. And we're going to talk about having an alternative option for them. Okay. If we have a dog where we've set up our feeding and they like to run to the crate, so a dog who's not petrified, okay, but who will go outside all day long with you and then runs back inside and heads straight to their crate for using the bathroom, we feed, and then we need to make sure that they don't have access to that crate for the time frame until we know they're going to defecate, and we can have them do that in the elimination area. Okay, so that's where that feeding schedule comes in as well. So we feed outside. For our dogs who are worried, I might feed just outside. For my dogs that aren't worried, I'm still going to feed outside the crate, ideally, or maybe even somewhere else, but I'm not going to give them access to that crate until we eliminate somewhere else. Okay. Now, that also means I've got to have direct supervision on those dogs, constantly making sure they're out to that elimination area so that I only give them access to that crate once they have urinated or defecated. Okay. Learning history. So we need to think about the dogs that, not just the dogs that run back in because they want to do it, but the dogs that this is all they have known. Okay. So there's a difference there with the dogs, younger dogs that may have learned they can just go there. It's not a big deal. Those are the ones we want to shut off. But what about the dogs that's their safe area? That's everything they know. That's their world. Okay. Those dogs we want to handle a little bit differently. While I, yes, may feed them just outside the crate, some of them might not even eat outside the crate. So we've got to think about our learning history. And then for those dogs that are truly petrified, that won't eat outside the crate, won't come outside the crate. I find often in these cases that I'm going to make it harder for them and harder for me if I continually try to get them out of the crate to use the bathroom. So instead, if I can't beat them, I'm going to join them. And how I like to do this is I like to, first of all, invest in a crate that is a bit larger than what I would normally use for house training. So for many of our puppies under direct supervision, crate recommendations are for the length of the dog. We want them to be able to walk in and turn around with a couple inches above them, right? Because most animals are not inclined to use the bathroom where they sleep and where they eat, most dogs. But for my dogs, that's all they've known, it doesn't matter. Okay. So for these guys, I want a bigger crate. I'm going to break down why. I want them to not only be able to walk in and turn around, I want them to have some room that eventually I'm going to use a bed. But for the beginning, we're just going to get used to the crate and we're going to let them be where they want to be. So what I do is I select a substrate that I'm going to cover this larger crate's floor in, the entire floor. It doesn't really matter if it's pads or if it's turf. Sometimes you have to play around depending on the dog and if they're worried, but I want to cover the entire floor and I want them to get used to using the bathroom on that surface, that substrate. Okay. And I will do this for several weeks, depending again on that dog's learning history. It could be 2 weeks, it might be 4. Once I feel like my dog is starting to make the connection, then I will divide half the crate in the substrate and the other half I will fill with a bed, soft and cushy and warm, ideally. Now, if we have accidents in the bed, we take the bed out and we work a little longer and then we try it again, okay? But if they've made a connection to the substrate, ideally, they're going to choose that substrate over the cushy bed. Now, some dogs don't like cushy beds. Sometimes they want the flooring because that's what they've gotten used to and that's what they're comfortable with. So maybe I just have their food and their water bowl on that floor and they can lay there and the substrate's on the other half. You may have to play around. But the goal is if I can create a CER, which is conditioned emotional response. So calm, relaxed, comfortable enough to use the bathroom on this surface or substrate. Okay. Then I should be able to eventually make that smaller in the crate to where eventually I could start to move it slowly, partially out of the crate and then just outside the crate and then a little further from the crate. And this is a very, very slow process, but it works very well for my worried, fearful dogs while still giving them the safety of their crate. Okay. Eventually, over time, lots and lots of time, you might even be able to get that to a second area and your dog may start coming out. But this is a way to do it for my dogs that don't just run from the outside in happily and use the bathroom in the crate. These are my dogs that never want to exit the crate. Okay. So lots of options there for dogs that prefer to use the bathroom in the crate. Okay. And then we have those lovely dogs that we have to go to work. And so we leave down our pads and we make a nice little area. And what do? They think it's a toy and it's a game and they destroy them and we still have bathroom problems everywhere, right? And that's just super annoying. Oh, I'm going backwards. Apologies. Forwards is where we want to go. So when we have this problem, we want to start with increasing enrichment, okay? They're playing with them, they're bored, and that is 99% of the time what the issue is. So we need more mental stimulations. These are the dogs where every meal is coming from a food toy, okay? We need to look at their exercise. Are they getting an appropriate amount for their age, for their breed? Do we need to have a pet sitter come in halfway through the day or a family member let them out? What about the toys that are in there? Do they like the toys? Do they play with them? Do we rotate the toys to keep them from getting bored? Also here with our management's going to be key here, right, for these guys. So that's going to come down to our schedule, our elimination area. And then additionally, you can also use management to help deter the tearing of pads. They have pad holders. They have pad adhesives. They also have turf boxes now and litter pans that are harder to pick up. Again, still not always easy with my dogs that like to play. So that's why you see the top 3 as enrichment, exercise, and toys, right? And And then again, I mentioned you could find an alternative substrate for these guys as well. I generally, if I'm going to do an alternative substrate, these are the ones where will make a larger area, like an X pin and a crate, and put that alternative substrate in the X pin. You can purchase X pins with lids. So you just make an extension of your crate, a little bit bigger space, right? But you are trying to create an area for the bathroom and an area for play. I will say in that bathroom area, depending on how I set it up, right? Often it is in a box. Some people use whelping boxes. I will tell you what works great that I like to use a lot are those little kiddie pools. And I will put my substrates in there. Generally my substrates that are hard to get up, taped down, and or actual dirt or grass chunks, right? And so that can certainly help with the play. And then we have this other area for play. But enrichment, exercise toys are going to be key for that one. Now, one thing I will add as we're moving through all of these, I have just a few more to go through, is that house training is a process. We've talked about preventing it with identification and expectations, right, and management. But everybody's lifestyle and every dog's lifestyle and history is different. So you may find that you are pulling from one solution, pulling from several solutions for different scenarios to create a way to help your dog make the connection to their elimination area. Okay, don't feel like it's just a one and done, right? You might have a variety of tools and use and ideas to get you guys where you need to be. All right, let's talk about some outside issues, okay? So we're going to look at dogs that struggle with house training because they have learned to go inside the home, and we would like them to now go outside the home. This is generally my puppies who've learned on pads. We also have those dogs that are scared or nervous about going outside, and this can complicate house training. And then we have those really unusual cases where the dogs are just worried about you watching them. Let's start with the easier one. While yes, this can be time consuming, I feel like this is actually a fairly easy one to do, inside to outside. So often for various reasons, whether it's weather or the size of the dog or where they live, people will train the puppies inside on pads first. That's fine. It's completely reasonable. And we certainly work with clients that do that all the time, okay? What I want to encourage you to do is that when you're doing this, you still want your dog on a schedule. Okay, so as they're starting to make that connection, doggone computer, I need them on a schedule. And the reason that's important is because we're going to use that to get them outside, right? Because now they're getting bigger and the messes are getting bigger. We'd really like them to be eliminating outside if that's our ultimate goal. So as I said, a schedule. If I have the dog on a schedule inside the home, so I know ideally when they're going to urinate, when they're going to defecate, then that's when I start to have them outside, because I know that that's when that bladder and that's when that colon are full. I want to select an elimination area outside that's hopefully as similar as possible to the inside, right? So if my inside area is in a corner, has some privacy, then outside we want to kind of find an area that's more private for them as well. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Have it similar. We are also going to increase our treat value, right? So we may have minimized the treats we're using inside. Maybe we aren't using them. We may want to go back to them, or we may want to, if we're just using kibble or praise, we're going to now go to chicken or cheese. Okay. I will also, with these guys, take the inside out. So I will take my pads outside to the area I have selected and hopefully help encourage them to go there, especially if I'm out there with that full bladder or colon. Additionally, with that, I can actually take urine and feces and put them out there. Yes, I recommend this for, yes, it sounds gross, but it can be very helpful at my dogs making that connection. And then ultimately, the last thing I will offer to do is move the actual pad area. So sometimes we just have people pick up pads. The dogs are on such a good schedule. We end up outside. We put a pad outside. They make that connection pretty easily. As soon as they're outside going on the pad, we make the pad smaller and smaller until it's just outside. Well, if I don't make that connection very easily, I can actually move the pads from the inside to the outside. And when I do that, I have my pads down. I'm still going to my elimination area outside with the dog. I still have a pad there, okay? But I will take the pads inside, and every 2 or 3 days, I move them maybe a foot closer towards the exit door to the outside. Yes, it's a process. Yes, it's slow. But guys, it works great if you just take your time with it, right? So we move it, then 3, 4 days later, we move it another foot. 3, 4 days later, we move it another foot until eventually we're at the door and then just outside the door and then towards our elimination area. And then we get rid of the pad. Okay. So it works very well. It's just a process. And again, if you've got your dog on a really good schedule, I'm jumping ahead too fast. Hopefully you don't need to do that. We can just end up outside where we want to be with our dogs, and they've got a full bladder and a full colon. We stay out there long enough, they go. And then we reward them with this awesome reward, connection made. All right, what about my dogs that just are a little bit nervous about going outside? These are dogs generally that have come from situations where they weren't properly socialized or exposed. I've also seen this where dogs who have lived in rural settings suddenly come into more city settings. So the sounds of cars and the busyness around them is bothersome, and they just really aren't comfortable going outside. How am I going to get them to learn an elimination area? Well, let's talk about this. First, we do want to find an elimination area that's as close as possible to our exit door. Okay. This ideally, if it's just outside the exit door, is even better to start with. That's not always feasible, depending on people's lives, but as close as possible. We do want to actually try to have it as private as possible. So selecting an area that's next to some bushes on one side and a fence on the other could be nice, or maybe bushes on one side and your car on the other. However you want to think about this, but blocking the visuals from all that stuff that can be very concerning to them is ideal, because I need them to be calm and comfortable if they're going to eliminate, so that I have the opportunity to reward them. Okay. Now, separately, I also want to encourage them to check out the outside on their own. That outside isn't so scary. Okay. So we can play some games in the home. We can play the game of opening the door, and the dog kind of walks towards the door on their own, and they stop because they're worried about it. And I say, great job for going this far. And we close the door and we run back inside to our safe place. Okay. So I can actually teach my dog that if you will try it, I'll let you run back inside to safety. Okay. Over time, if your dog learns that you're not going to push them or lure them and give them the choice to go out on their own, they'll start to go a little further, and then we can run back inside. And then we slowly build this process up to get to our elimination area. I can also play a treat retreat game where I toss a treat, not out the door. It's generally too much for my dogs, but towards the door. And they go to get the treat, and then I toss a retreat treat behind them back into the safety of the home. So they're more comfortable trying to go get that treat if they know they can retreat and return to safety. And we can eventually do this out the door and then to the elimination area. Yes, it takes a couple days, maybe a couple weeks. But you will have much more successful long-term results if we take our time and help our dog learn that the outside isn't so scary, and that you can always run back to safety. Okay. Now, because it's going to take us some time, we do want to offer a temporary relief area inside the home that the dog can use. Okay. Whether it's pads or turf, I normally recommend, if I'm going outside, to try to create a relief area that's going to be similar to the elimination area we have selected outside. So if this is gravel, I set up a kiddie pool with some gravel and dirt. If it is wood, I set up a kiddie pool with some dirt and wood on top, right? We're trying to make it as similar as possible inside. And we get them on a schedule going to that one, right? So we know when that bladder and that colon is full. So when we're ready to get all the way there outside, we're there with a full bladder and colon. Additionally, I can identify the things that might bother my dog. Sounds, specific car sounds, trash trucks, maybe it's wind. It depends on the dog and the scenario, right? And I can use DSCC, which is desensitization and counter conditioning. I can slowly expose them at levels to those identified triggers triggers, excuse me, where they are comfortable enough to eat a treat so that I can counter or change how they feel about it. And over time, I can increase the intensity of the trigger. And that helps me help them learn to be more comfortable outside. And then, of course, with these dogs, we can definitely always add a calming aid like an adaptable collar or some spray on a bandana that we wear around our neck. Now, the other one that we run into with our outside dogs are our dogs that tended or did run free. These might be my street dogs that are rescued. Maybe it's a farm dog who's now living in the city. But dogs that there was no restrictions to when they could eliminate, right? I find that many of these dogs struggle simply because they're on a leash and you're right there. And I didn't do this in front of people before. So would you please go away? Well, we can't go away. So how do we help them? Well, first and foremost, we want to get a long line. I normally like at least a good 30 feet. I want my dog to be able to get far enough away from me that they do not feel, or rather they feel as if they have privacy from what's going on, okay? These are also dogs, I don't talk to them while they're out there sniffing, trying to find a spot. I don't want to distract them. I don't want them to be really aware of me. I want them to get so lost in looking, they don't think about me, okay? Treat delivery. We know treats should come a half an inch to an inch after the dog has used the bathroom. Well, that's kind of hard to do if they're 30 feet away. So for these dogs, if I chose to, I could chuck a treat at them, okay? I will tell you often that these dogs they just feel better once they go because they've able to do it because they had privacy, that I often don't get too caught up in the treat. And instead, I let the actual elimination or defecation reward them for actually going on a leash away from me. Okay, so something to consider when you're working with these dogs. Make sure when you are out there that while you are watching them, you're not directly watching them. They know this. Turn your body, stand sideways, watch from the corner of your eyes, pretend you're on your phone, ignoring them, right? Dogs are very intuitive to our body language and what we're doing. And then lastly, I will try to find areas that are going to be similar to what I think the dog might have used the bathroom comfortably in before. So quieter, more private areas, forest, a pathway through some trees, tall grasses. Maybe this looks to be in an alley, depending again on where the dog's history is from, if you know it, or if you have a suspicion of one. Our own dog was rescued from running loose for several weeks on the local greenway. She would not defecate for the first 4 days at our house. What did I do? I took her to the greenway. Guess what? She defecated 3 times within the first 40 minutes of the walk. So she definitely had to go, but she just was not comfortable in her new environment. And we actually had to have her walk in that area for several weeks before I finally got her to walk to defecate not in our yard, but down our street in a quieter private setting that was similar to this greenway where she walked, right? And to this day, we've had her almost 3 years. She has only ever defecated in our yard one time. She's also on a long leash to do this. And that was when she had diarrhea, bless her heart. So again, we kind of have to tweak things and figure out what's going to work best for our dogs. Okay, wrapping things up because I know we're running into our hour time. Last one I want to talk about are those unrealistic expectations. Okay, so we run into the challenge of owners having unrealistic expectations, and then we end up with incomplete house training. One such is ringing a bell, but it's not really about the bell. It's about the expectation of the owner or, guardian thinking that the dog's going to tell them they need to go out. Remember, house training is us. It's not our dogs, okay? They don't come with a book that says, I need to knock on the door and let mom know I have to go. So, solution here? Well, first and foremost, we really, really, really want to educate guardians about the fact that while we can teach a dog to ring a bell to go outside, they're not going to instinctually know this, okay? And we also want to educate them quite a bit on how house training even happens. So how we teach the dog to know that this is where they need to eliminate is because we always end up in that area based on our schedule and our direct supervision with the dog having a full bladder and a full colon, or one or the other, okay? Because they make a connection that when I feel like this, I need to be here, right? And we can reward the action of the urination and the defecation, but the connection is about that feeling, that association, which is classical conditioning or learning. So it's very important we help our owners understand that, okay? We want them to know how our dogs learn. And then we want them to understand why schedules work because of that learning, right? So we have to help them understand this is why you go out after an hour after they've eaten or after they've napped, because you're ending up outside with this full bladder or this full colon. We also want to educate them on body language. What does it look like when the dog is thinking they might need to use the bathroom, right? When that dog's starting to feel the pressure, is there something they're doing? Because their instinctual body language in preparation of eliminating is what we want to first identify if we're even going to help them make the connection to tell us to go outside. We want to identify that natural signal first, right? So what does that look like? Is it pacing, circling, maybe some digging, maybe it's sniffing, right? Maybe it's slow repetitive movements back and forth, because that's going to say to us, okay, now we need to run over, ding the bell, and go outside. Or we just go outside when we see it, and that becomes a signal. Even better, because it's a natural signal from the dog, okay? The biggest challenge we have is that whether we're teaching a bell or a target, is that when we do go outside, if we want whatever signal we've decided on to be the sign for us to take them out, for the dog to tell us, is we then have to make sure that we go outside and use the bathroom. We don't go outside and we don't play. So we're outside on a leash, right? And we're on the leash until we have eliminated, even if that means we have to come back in the house temporarily and go on our crate or be on a leash, and then we go back outside. We're not off that leash until we're done, because I want them to understand that when I see you sit by the door or when I see you pace, that is not just to go outside, which is what often happens. It's that we go outside and we use the bathroom, and then once you're done with the bathroom, you can come off the leash and you can go play. Because if I don't get all the way through this process of association, ring bell, outside, outside, bathroom, right? So the outside, and I'm just using the outside as the example. It could be any elimination area, but elimination area, full bladder, elimination, full bladder. I need that to happen. And then over time, we can say bell, elimination area, bell, elimination area, bell, full bladder, bell, full bladder, right? But it takes time to get there. And what we ultimately end up seeing is dogs learning to give signals or ring doorbells to just go outside and play, and not necessarily, darn computer, use the bathrooms. So to sum up, house training isn't fun, I don't think, for anybody. Sometimes it's easy, but generally not. But when we provide guardians with tips on prevention and tools for identifying potential problems, we can avoid having to find a solution, right? And we are securing dogs a permanent place in their new home, right? Whether it's a puppy or a rescue. Okay, so again, there's no one size fits all here. Take and pull from any of the ideas for any of the solutions. You may have to tweak it. You may have multiple problems that are inhibiting you from finding that successful house training protocol, but it can be done. So hopefully we've given you guys some good ideas and you've enjoyed our webinar today. Stay tuned for our next one in our surrender prevention series next month. If you guys are interested in partnering with Good Pup, I encourage you to reach out to us at our email, shelters@goodpup.com. And then lastly, thank you all for coming. We look forward to seeing you again next month. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.